That didn't work, so I'm just going to start. How about that? So, Judy Benson, the Dean of the House School, introduced Treasurer Mark Gordon this morning, so I won't say much more than what she said, except to thank the Treasurer for his interest in taking the time in what I think is a very important topic. Treasurer Gordon will be moderating the next panel, which will continue to explore the community and business opportunities associated with wind. I know many of you are hungry to talk about wind wildlife and view sheds, and know that that is coming. You can continue to ask questions, certainly, but that is also part of the agenda. But for now, we'll be focusing on economic business opportunities for Wyoming. Thank you for moderating.
Thank you, Nicole. Yes, there it is. Thank you, Nicole. I want to actually thank Emily Sorensen, who's organized a lot of this. She's responsible for the way all these microphones work and everything else. Emily, wherever you are, thank you. We have a great panel here today, and I had nothing to do with setting it up. But I want to introduce kind of in the order that we're going to go through this. First, I want to talk about Jerimiah Rieman. And you got his resume, his background, and his CV in your booklet, so I won't spend a lot of time. Other than Jerimiah, I was really disappointed to see your RAM. But that's okay. But Jerimiah is running the governor's ENDOW initiative, which is one of the most exciting things that Wyoming has done in quite some time, and this is perfectly in its wheelhouse. Second, I'm going to ask somebody I've known for a very long time, Riatta Little, down at the end for the Casper Economic Development Association, or Alliance. And she has a tremendous amount of experience, both sort of in policy positions and then on the ground. Most notable is the fact that she and the daughter I talked about earlier today, Lee, have won the rescue race in Johnson County Rodeo. So Riatta, it's really good to have you here. And then we have Jason Eddy, who is the vice president of a company which is really poised to make the most of the opportunities that wind give us, L&H Industrial. And Jason, I really enjoyed our conversation the other day, driving north, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. And finally, to my right here is my own representative, Mike Madden. Mike's, well, Mike, you did come to Wyoming. You were a ENDOW person here for a while. You're a PhD in economics, and so we're excited to hear from you. So with that, what I'd like to do is start out with Jerimiah, kind of setting the stage, talking a little bit about him. Oh, I'm sorry, Rick. My gosh. I went right past my notes. Thank you. Yeah. So Rick Grant, actually, he will be fourth. He's a rancher and commissioner from Converse County. And Converse County has seen a tremendous amount of development. But I think also Rick brings an experience from being on the school board, so he has that experience, but he's also a private property owner, and I'm hoping that he can give us a little perspective on those issues as well. So my apologies, Rick. I won't pass by Converse County anymore. So Jerimiah, thank you.
Well, Mr. Treasurer, a pleasure to be here with all of you today, and yes, I am a CSU graduate, but I am paying my debts back to the state day by day. Promise to make good on that. It's been great to work for the last 9 months on the ENDOW initiative, and I wanted to just give a little bit of perspective on where we're at in that conversation and how I think it ties into this. I'll keep it brief because I think the conversation here would be greater for it. But one thing that I want to start out with, we put out a survey in February, I believe, had it out there for a couple of months, really trying to gauge where the public wanted to see us go with the ENDOW initiative. And as it relates to wind energy, it was pretty clear to all of us, and we received over 400 individual responses, It was a long survey. I think we had 17 questions on there. They were open-ended, so it really demanded some thought go into those responses. But it was pretty clear to us that the people of Wyoming wanted wind energy or renewables to be part of our economic future. And so we've certainly taken that of note. We're starting to get into that conversation of what industries we should pursue. And as part of that, we've engaged in a number of conversations with developers and others in industry to try and understand what it is that they want. And I think there are a few things that we've heard, and I've heard some of it in the dialogue that I engaged with as I got here. And those things are, one, efficiency in terms of the permitting process. It's been too long in process, whether that's the federal permitting process or the state process. Second, and I think this goes for any industry, but there's a real sense that we need to have some tax stability in the state, and that means that we need to make some decisions about where we're headed, whether that's taxing of wind in additional ways. Should we back off? Or should we look at other taxes or use of our rainy day fund to cover some of our expenses, such that industry doesn't feel as if we're going to be coming after them. And then I think the third one that really relates to this industry is a real sense that we want to have support within state government for what we're doing. So I'm taking that into account. As I said, we're looking at, in this next phase for ENDOW, really digging into those industries of opportunity, those sectors and clusters that present the greatest opportunity for us. And one of those areas, obviously, is additional wind development in the state, but manufacturing. And I think that there is this sense within our group that you really can't try and build and attract wind manufacturing or other renewables here if you really don't have the policies or even the industry in your state. And so we need to be thinking about that. And if you look at our report that we put out a few weeks ago, we talk about sectors of our economy, and in particular we start to highlight those underrepresented sectors. And you can see in there that manufacturing pops up as one of those major underrepresented sectors of our economy, and so we'll take some additional look at that. We're interested in advanced composites. We have actually a carbon manufacturer on our executive council, and that group is currently putting together carbon fiber and then shipping it to Europe for construction into wind turbine blades. And I know that they would love to have additional opportunities to pursue that industry in the state and in the United States more broadly. We're also, I think, we'll have to look at things like battery storage as a major opportunity, not only for the wind industry and renewables more broadly, but as an opportunity space for the state of Wyoming to be on the front edge of actually helping with the development of that innovation, because it will be needed across a number of things for renewables, but also some of the other technologies that we see coming online. Driverless vehicles. We've been working in our office on flying cars, essentially, vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, and that's going to be an incredibly important thing for that group. And I think another place that, in terms of this conversation, that we need to have additional dialogue, and it goes back to some of those old wounds where we had for a long time a conversation of pitting renewables against coal and oil and gas. And that is that these two resources that are important to Wyoming actually can work together. And in that, we can have a value-added resource development play in the state of Wyoming. So that's a little bit of where I see the conversation with ENDOW. but certainly interested to engage in some additional dialogue as we move through the process and go towards developing that 20-year strategy that we'll release next year.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Riatta.
Hello? Okay. So I am Riatta Little. I am the Vice President of Economic and Project Development. Actually, that just changed to VP of Business Development for the Casper Area Economic Development Alliance. So in a lot of ways, very similar to what Jeremiah is trying to do with ENDOW, except I'm focused on Natrona County specifically. So everything that I speak about is going to be pretty Natrona County focused, but if it's good for Natrona County, it's good for Wyoming. So we can create jobs in Natrona County in wind. Casper primarily has the largest industrial base in Wyoming. Cheyenne is up there, but I think Casper really has a bigger industrial base. So as I'm looking at manufacturing and energy opportunities for the Casper area, I see wind as a great diversification option as oil and gas is suffering a little bit right now. The skills of our workforce is very transferable into the wind sector. A lot of existing companies in Casper can diversify into the wind space if we are successful in recruiting maybe one or two companies into Wyoming that already have an established relationship in wind. Then it opens up doors for our existing companies who have only been focused in oil and gas and can now start doing some things in wind, which Jason can talk a lot about too, because L&H is already doing that. So creating jobs and options for our companies, that's what I'm looking at. I'm talking to some companies across the nation who see the potential for Wyoming to grow and growing out here in the western states, and you saw that in some of the presentations this morning, where it's, I guess, interior. I always say western states, but it's really that interior. And according to AWEA, the American Wind Energy Association, Wyoming has the greatest potential for wind generation. So the key word there is potential. And there are so many different things that have to happen at the same time for us to be successful, and that is generation and development and manufacturing. So you can't just focus on manufacturing, you have to be looking at everything. So a lot of exciting things that I can't necessarily share with you because I have to be confidential on companies that I'm talking to, but you have to look at everything, and that's what we're trying to do here today.
Well, thanks. I thought you were going to say I can't tell you because you're going to have to kill you if I do. So what our format here is that everybody's going to have a little bit of a chance to speak, and then we'll break it out for questions to specific individuals. Jason, could you tell us a little bit about L&H and the opportunities you see? And I think also, particularly because you have that background kind of in the coal industry and how you're transforming the company to a degree.
Sure. Yeah, and good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me down today and letting me be a part of this discussion. I'm with L&H Industrial. Our corporate office is based out of Gillette, Wyoming. We do major mechanical and industrial services and repair, obviously throughout Wyoming, through the whole western half of the U.S., down into South America, and all the way as far north as Canada. Really what a couple of years ago when L&H brought me on as a product line manager in power generation is to just help us get further downstream in energy and find new opportunities to keep the company healthy and keep us growing. Obviously, we've been around more than 50 years, cut our teeth in oil and gas, and then made our name in mining and the coal industry. And we're still a very big part of that as far as service and maintenance goes, but it's a market that's shrinking. So the best we can do is try to grow our market share in a shrinking market. As we looked at that and the company looked further downstream in energy, we started to identify other industries that still fit what our people and our equipment and our facilities did well, and wind is a big part of that. Before coming on board with L&H Industrial, I was involved and managed and led other large independent services groups, and for almost a decade, the bulk of what I did was in wind and major correctives. So really that's my focus here today, and my focus also with L&H is to just help us grow and help us seek other opportunities that fit our core capabilities and what our people want to do well.
Won't forget this time, Rick. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. As we get into the afternoon, it's often that we find ourselves dozing. We sit up here in these soft chairs, academia style. Hopefully none of us find ourselves tipping over a little bit, but as I look across the room, I'm Rick Grant, Converse County Commissioner and landowner and rancher in southwest Converse County. I started the process of looking at wind in 2006 and 7. Wind was the buzzword. There were organizations taking place looking at developing wind associations. I live in the southernmost part of the county where we don't have a lot of development activity. No oil, no gas, no coal, but we have plenty of rocks and wind. So as we looked at it, the Wyoming Business Council had a program called the Loan Program, or a lease, where we could go and lease a Met Tower to study the wind. I talked to a neighbor, we decided we'd lease a tower, see if we had a viable product. Before we had a year's worth of data, we had wind companies knocking on our door wanting that data. Pretty quick, we must have some pretty good data. So in January of 2009, we started working on a contract with a company, one of 4 who had been knocking on our door. 9 months later, this farm boy found out what contracts were about and how to protect my own interests. As we worked through that, it came quick to my realization that I'm dealing with something that's not just going to affect me, but 2 generations beyond me. We're looking at a 30-year contract with a 30-year extension. I'm probably not going to be here in 60 years. So I have to make sure that that contract protects my interests and my future generations. It also, at the time, was before the industrial siting had any rules, regulations, and guidelines for wind. So as we worked through this, we developed decommissioning. We worked on taxes and what it was going to do to my property and what they were going to have to pick up. We had to talk about all that. Ironically, the next few months when legislation convened, we had some guidelines. They mirrored many of what we worked on, so it made me feel pretty good about what we had dealt with and worked with. We saw slides this morning that showed there has been 1 project completed since 2010. I'm proud to say that that project is the Pioneer Wind Project on part of my ranch. I started this project before I became a commissioner. In February of 2012, I was appointed to fill a vacated seat by the late Dave Edwards. From that point forward, any decisions that came before our commission, I recused myself from. I could not go into that meeting and make decisions knowing that it could possibly benefit me. So I would either leave the room if a decision was made, or I would sit in the audience if it was a discussion issue. So those are some things that, as I worked forward, I had to deal with. This project did not start until May of 2016. It took us 7 years to come to fruition. This project has gone through every court possible. We started in district court. We went to the Wyoming Supreme Court, was heard by a federal judge through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, all of which prevailed and became a reality in October of 16. Those people that worked at that, ironically in May, went through a downturn in the coal industry. Several employees lost their jobs. In June, they held a job fair. Many of those 300 employees came from the coal mines. They had to swallow their pride a little bit because they didn't have a job and they were the ones thinking that we were putting them out of business. I've said all along that wind is only a part of America's need for energy. As I look at these tables, we all have an outlet on the front row. And if you start down at that end, coal provides power to that one, and oil and gas. And hydro and wind and solar, but they all have a common thread. There's one cord, one transmission line. It takes all of it to make this thing happen. So as we look forward, as a landowner, you need to protect your interests. You need to know what you're doing. Research. I became a wind guy 101 by School of Hard Knocks. I've researched it, I've looked at it, I've gone to court, I've gone to legislative sessions. We know what it takes to make wind work in Wyoming. We have that ability with the resource. When the wind blows, it sucks the moisture out of the ground. It takes our topsoil and blows it away. It takes life from a newborn calf. It shatters the grains that are ready to be harvested when the wind blows. So when wind was an opportunity for the ag producer, it gave us an option to have a viable, stable revenue that we could depend on for 20 years. This revenue has given me the opportunity to bring a family member, my son, home to be a partner on the ranch. It's also given me the ability to restore a 115-year-old barn, which is a useless building in today's agriculture. We don't we don't put our horsepower in the barn anymore. The tractors are too big to fit through the door. We don't house our grain there because we produce more than what the granaries will hold. Yet I've restored it because it's a historical area within our community. Everybody sees it. It's within 40 feet of a county road. So I've restored that. I was able to provide the type of wedding for my daughter a week ago. Had we not had some wind money, we probably would have been a little better than sipping Kool-Aid and eating bologna sandwiches. But I gave her the wedding that I thought we all would like to have. So it's given me that ability to stay in business, not sell to a corporate operation. It allows me to continue to buy my feed from local feed stores, buy my equipment from the local producer, and keeps me in business. It's what America needs to do to keep the ag guy in business, is to give them a stable, level revenue source. We live on a small margin as it is. It's nice to have that stable revenue. I got a little long-winded, sorry.
No, I think you brought up excellent points and helped move the conversation forward. Mike, could you talk a little bit about what the state sees?
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As the treasurer said, I'm a member of the legislature, and what he didn't tell you, I'm the chairman of the House Revenue, which unfortunately makes me the most despised person in Wyoming. So, welcome. We're here to talk about community development and business and opportunities of communities from a number of facets. Of course, there's employment, you got business activity on Main Street, just the general vitality and quality of life is important when it comes to opportunities. And also the fiscal means to finance the things that local governments are expected to deliver. And I'm going to focus on the fiscal aspects of community development today and how it pertains to wind. Over the years, I've developed, I guess I'd call it a back pocket model to evaluate whether a development opportunity has fiscal impacts that are in line and commensurate with the needs for government services. And Wyoming is kind of easy to do that because we only have two basic taxes. We have sales tax and property tax and a few ancillary taxes, but like the fuel taxes and so on. But when it comes to wind in this model, sales taxes is always a win-win for everybody concerned because it increases business volume. And now when I talk about the impacts from wind today on a fiscal basis, I'm going to talk about only the operations and maintenance phase of it, not the construction and all that, because that is so variable that you can't really measure it. Property taxes is the other tax, and it's of greater interest since many local community services are financed by local property taxes. You can break down the property tax beneficiaries into the city, the county, and the school. Generally, property taxes benefit cities as long as property is in cities. Well, obviously there's no wind turbines in cities, so there's not an impact on property tax of any measurable amount to cities. Counties, on the other hand, they do have a benefit because all of the wind turbines are out in the counties proper. And the thing about counties is that if you look at county costs, it's basically their fixed costs. And you add any new impact of revenue, it's always a win-win for them. Schools is a different situation. The reason for that is when you use this back pocket model of mine, you have to ask, how much is revenue going to grow? And how much will school costs grow? Because school costs are all variable costs the way we set up our model in the state. This is how I worked it for the wind energy in this back pocket model for property tax. What I did is I went out and picked a county. And I picked a county that had a lot of turbines in it. I couldn't pick my own county because we don't have any turbines. And then I had to look at the fair market value of the wind turbine investment. And then I had to look at the fractional assessment that we have of 11.5%. Then I apply the 43 mils times that. And the thing that's kind of amazing when it comes to wind farms, if you just take all of the valuation of a wind farm and divide it on a per turbine basis, you get about a little bit over $3 million. You divide it or multiply it times 11%, you get about 330 million or 330,000, and then you multiply the mill levy times that taxable value or assessed value, I should say. And what you come up with for schools is every turbine generates about $14,300 per turbine for wind tax or for schools. Now this varies by size of the turbines. Small turbines it'll be a little less, but big turbines a little more. So you know that was kind of interesting to me because that's pretty much exactly what it costs us to educate one student. Okay. So when I come down here today, I went through Shirley Basin and I looked at those turbines. And I wasn't looking at turbines anymore, I was looking at public school students. And I also know, I think there's about 1,000 turbines in the state right now. So out of our 90,000 students or so, 1,000 of them are being educated by wind turbines, if you will. The next thing I had to do in my model is find out how many students are going to be added to the system, because of course there's going to be an increase in revenue, but you get an increase in cost too. But it turns out on average is that for every turbine or every 10 turbines you have one employee. So in our case in Wyoming we have 100 employees that work on operations and maintenance. That's what the Bureau of Labor Statistics says. So anyway, on average 10 workers brings about four students, okay? So we have 4 students that have to be paid for out of that revenue, but that means we got 96 students that is going to have their education paid for by the wind turbine industry. And you know, why does this happen? Obviously it happens because the wind energy has such a high capital labor ratio. A high amount of capital, very few amounts of labor that are hired, and that's what makes it work. We have some industries where we don't have that benefit. Manufacturing, for example, you know, I think for most manufacturing, we take a fiscal bath every time a manufacturing industry business opens up. One that does work is data storage. That's another one, big capital labor ratios. They don't employ very many people. It happens that most of them are right around Cheyenne. And at least the way it used to be, most of the workers in these data storage places live in Denver or in Colorado somewhere. So we don't even have to educate them either. So that's really a win-win. as a side note, the Revenue Committee was instrumental this year in getting a new model, a module that is going to be very effective, we hope, in allowing the state to analyze for any NAICS code, any business classification code, what the true net fiscal impact is before we end up with something that we can't afford. This is going to be valuable when considering, I call it the Wyoming State Government Bank. In Wyoming, we have a habit of lending money out to people and businesses that doesn't happen in hardly any other states. And sometimes they want us to absorb the risk factor, and we end up taking a bath on those too. But before we end up making those loans, hopefully my wish in the future is that we know ahead of time how much we're going to encumber future taxpayers in this state. So that's my analysis of it. There's some other tax issues. You know, we do have a wind generation tax of $1 a megawatt hour. Not very much. There's some good reasons why we should probably raise that tax, because there's a feeling on the part of Wyoming citizens that they are not being compensated for a diminution of view sheds and energy sprawl that takes place when we talk about wind. These are negative externalities that normally in the economic system you want to try to compensate for, and that the generation tax would be ideal for that. You know, eventually I think it has to be taken, it needs to be dealt with. I think it should be dealt with before we get any more wind developed, so people know up front that we have a wind generation tax. Eventually the public's going to demand it, and you're seeing more and more emails coming to legislators, more and more emails or letters to the editor and papers that are plenty mad about this, and they look at it as a diminution of the aesthetic properties of the state, and I think there's something to that. The rule of thumb is that for every 80 megawatt hours of produced electricity for a facility, it wipes out 40 or 50,000 acres. So 80 megawatts, 40 or 50,000 acres is about 8.5 miles by 8.5 miles. You know, I don't know how much wind we're going to be getting here, but it's going to have an impact pretty soon. We do have an analogy already when it comes to severance and compensatory taxes, and that's the severance tax for minerals. And you know, my approach has always been to let's make it comparable so we're not showing favors. I think it's more important to be thinking along that line now than ever before, because you're going to hear, if you haven't heard already, I didn't get here when the thing started, but you're going to hear today and tomorrow about speakers who say that wind is the most efficient way to expand electric generation capacity. Well, if it is, they should be willing, the customers that are demanding this wind energy should be willing to pay a certain amount, and that certain amount is not a lot, but when you consider how much more productive Wyoming wind is than other places, and how much lower their other taxes are than other places, I think that we have to move in that direction. What I'm looking at now is coming up with some kind of bill that would say that whatever we charge for a generation tax, we put 25% of it in the mineral, permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund, just like we do with oil and gas and coal and everything else. But I guess all I can say on that is stay tuned and we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Mike. Just for the record, he's the one that does your taxes. I'm the one that invests the money from the severance tax that saves you $1,500 every year. So thanks, Mike, for putting that great opportunity for me. No, but I think Mike actually brings up an interesting point, and I think all of the speakers here have talked about that, is that, you know, Wyoming, I think Jeremiah, Governor Moonlight, if I remember Governor Meade talking about the need to diversify our economy and how we do that. I remember the Constitutional Convention, they spent a lot of time talking about what the severance tax on coal should be. We passed it in 1974, but a rate of 1.5% was talked about during the Constitutional Convention. And Wyoming has gone through these booms and busts over the years, and part of your job is to try and figure out how you get something to stick here, how you get our economy to diversify, and how you make sure that we have capacities in the state. And so I didn't know if you wanted to take a moment, just kind of reflect a bit on that, and then maybe we can walk down, and we'll open the floor here for questions here momentarily.
Yeah, so you're right that we are trying to really dig in on where those opportunities are to create jobs. And part of that for us, of course, is an educational component. We're really finding that we need to have both of those in the mix. And as we begin to identify those sectors, we'll do more of that analysis on where our barriers and enablers are within each one of those. And one of those elements, of course, is this tax question. And the representative talked about the modeling. We actually funded the model so that we could use that in our purposes to evaluate these decisions, because there are certainly those industries that will tell you taxes, of course taxes are important to everybody, but they're of less interest to some industries, and talent and other elements are a heck of a lot more important. The tech industry being one example, there's a reason that they go to California. And then there are other industries that are certainly more sensitive to these price changes, and so we want to evaluate that as we go through our process to make sure that we are well informed when we make those decisions. And we need to look at the variety of different taxes that exist out there, and where there are opportunities not to necessarily disrupt things, but to create opportunities. One that I know you and I have talked about, of course, is BLM. When they permit these projects, they're granting a right-of-way and collecting fees for that right-of-way. And on our traditional sources of energy development, the state of Wyoming gets 50% or 48% of the royalties and other payments, but we receive none of that benefit from wind. And is that an opportunity for Congress to make a change in the tax code such that we would receive some benefit? And there are different proposals that exist out there for that opportunity. One that proposes that that be split 50% with the federal government, 25% each to the state and local governments. Another one's a 50-50 split between the United States and the states. And so that may be an opportunity where those of us that may be experiencing some of those impacts might receive some of the tax benefit that otherwise is just going directly to the federal government's coffers.
No, and I think that's a really good point. Mike, I didn't mean to be tough on you, but Mike actually brings a very good point. Regardless of what happens, the net impact to the counties is pretty much the same. You have to, whether it's conventional energy sources, which do fund the state, versus wind energy sources, which have a somewhat less of a burden, but somewhat more of a challenge to develop. How do we get that to sort of be handled fairly? And I think that's a little bit of what Mike was talking about. And Rick, I didn't know if you could kind of talk a little bit about county's obligations and how you see that going forward.
As a county that has several wind projects on it, and the latest one, the counties need to work with these companies. They're not out to just take everything that there is. For instance, this latest one that we just went through, our county made a road use agreement for a long-term commitment. We have a road in which they used. They became the contractor to improve a road which had not seen any development or real major construction in years. So we were able to improve that road, not at our nickel, but at the companies. They needed to have that road passable. When we were done, we signed another agreement with them to help us pave the bottom portion because it's now an industrial road through YDOT. We will qualify now for some industrial monies and a cost share program. The wind company has agreed to kick in some dollars if we would return their bonding issue for the 2 miles of pavement. So we worked together. Some of the initial problems we had that were addressed, Converse County has a wind application. It mirrors many of the same items which industrial siding has. We don't force them to do 2. If the industrial siding wants it, we will accept it as part of our permit. If it doesn't go to industrial siding, we have many of the same proposals that they have to go through. Some economic issues, housing issues, road transportation, where are you going to house people, those things. So it's common to every wind operator that comes in and looks at this. Some of the problems that are associated with this is timing. Had this project started 2 years ago, we had 0 housing in Converse County. Where were these people going to be? They were all employed at either the mines north of Douglas, out in northern Converse County and Campbell County, or working in the oil field. Personnel becomes the issue. So as you move forward, it's a 2-year process. Counties need to know that this is not just something that's going to happen without a little effort. Your commission is basically the backbone that helps steer that county and that project to come through without causing problems and a shortfall of revenue. Part of the question we heard earlier was, why is there a difference that the county receives more than the state share? That was due to the fact that the compensation that was coming through sales tax was not adequate enough to meet the demands for the counties. So counties lobbied hard to get 60% of the $1 to come back to the counties to help us maintain the roads, provide for that infrastructure that was so needed when these people come in to start developing. Since then, I think there's been a philosophy that maybe we need to look at the state share, feeling that that percentage needs to be a little larger. Do we look at a new tax? It's been discussed multiple times at the legislative level. There really isn't a definite direction that I think everybody will be comfortable with, but as everybody knows, you don't please everybody, but if you can please some of those and get to a mutual understanding, it's good for everybody. I think we're working towards that. We don't have those answers yet.
Well, thanks. And Jason, you know, I think one of the things you've noticed over the years is that administrations come and administrations go, good times come and good times go. And your company has really built through all of that. It's been adaptable. It's had an ability to reach beyond the borders of the state, to grow and still manage to pull back business to Wyoming. So in a way, you know, you're exactly the example of the kind of industry we'd like to see. Can you talk about sort of how your company, what's its future and what it sees out over the horizon?
Sure. You know, it's kind of like I said in the beginning, it's obviously the call for us was to focus on what other opportunities are out there, but by no means abandon anything that we've, you know, done so well for so many years in those industries, but just to be real honest with ourselves of where they're at and where they're trending and how we can grow in other areas, and simply just look at what we're good at, the capabilities we have, the facilities, equipment, and then our biggest resources are people and what they're good at, you know, the welders and fabricators, machinists, and just see what else we can, you know, go get. And it hasn't just been wind, you know, it's been other industries as well, but we really migrated into wind just because it was logical for us to go further downstream in energy and go to power production and, you know, get into some of the plants that coal, you know, is going to and see what we can do in those power plants close to us and then spread out. And then it was just a logical step. A lot of those customers have wind assets as well, and just get into, you know, what is there as far as big, you know, mechanical equipment, drivetrains, steel, you know, inspection, welding. So, I mean, the short answer is where's the need and what are we good at, and not look at it so much as an industry, but just, you know, like equipment that we could, you know, help a new customer with. And, you know, we've really seen that in wind, there's still demand there. It's a new enough industry. There's a lot of people in the industry, such as us as service providers, but there's still room for more. I mean, we're kind of a good example of that, you know, we have major components in our shop right now from, you know, Wisconsin, and we sent people recently to Texas and Iowa to do inspections and, you know, metallurgical analysis, and you know, so logistically we're not the closest one, but I think, you know, we're still very effective with those people because there's a demand, because I think we do, you know, we know what we know and we're very good at it, and we have a good work ethic for it. So it's a good model, you know, and it would only help if there's more of the industry closer to us.
So, Mike, you know, really, Mike, you have been phenomenal in putting together a comprehensive and thoughtful approach to how the state's going to both make sure it gets its revenue, have a viable future, and I guess, you know, listening to Jason and Rick and Jerimiah, and then we'll give Riatta a chance to talk about this a little bit too. But, you know, as you look at the next 15 years, what are the challenges for Wyoming? How can, you know, we live pretty high off the hog because we have a lot of money. We feel it turns out we don't have as much as we'd like to have, and there's always that gap to come back to reality. But we want to build you know, an environment that's friendly to business, that doesn't overburden people with taxes, and then encourages companies like L&H to locate here so that Riatta has lots to do down the road.
Well, you've hit a lot of good points here, some of which keep me awake at night. If we go back to 2014 and look at who's paying for schools in Wyoming, and you translate that into students, okay? For rough estimates, let's say we have 90,000 students in Wyoming, and that's pretty close to what they are. But in 2014, the mineral industry paid for 68,000 of them. That's how imbalanced our system is. Out of 90,000, 68,000 were paid for by the mineral industry through ad valorem and gross products taxes primarily. Now they're at probably 55,000 students, all right? So in 2 or 3 years, we have dropped from 68,000 students to 55,000 students. So, you know, the treasurer is right. I mean, this is what you have to look for in the future. You know, these mineral jobs aren't coming back the way they were before. Everybody that keeps track of this stuff and realizes how the technology has changed and how tastes and preferences have changed knows that we're not going to be, there's nobody in this room that's going to ever see $106 a barrel oil again, and that's how we were fortunate in being able to build a big rainy day fund. But a rainy day fund is just what it is. It's a fund that can be used, but the more it's used, the quicker it runs out. And so anyway, that's where the growing pains are. And certainly an industry like wind will have a mitigating impact on that. The question is, though, how, you know, since we do see, you know, evidence, you know, and this is scholarly evidence, not just barroom talk or anything like that, but we have evidence that our overall tax structure is low compared to other states when you make comparisons. I've heard wind people tell us that, well, if we go to Texas, we get a break on our property taxes down there, unless we put them next to an air base, because air bases don't, and wind turbines don't mix. Probably for the same reasons that eagles don't mix with turbines, I don't know. But anyway, they keep away from there. But if you look at the wind discount, so to speak, in Texas, it's still 50% higher than our taxes are at full bore, the full price, all right? And that's what people have to realize, that, you know, we're 50th. It's nice to be 50th in some things, and one thing it's nice to be 50th of is in tax burden, and that's where we are, and that's why we're in this pickle we're in. You know, and the treasurer had us, it reminds me of another thing, the treasurer had us at a, what do you call that, a conclave or a seminar on investments, and it's been a very successful thing over the years. We had a guy from Texas there, and they made the transition, okay, that we're looking at right now as we see the threshold of it. But their maximum tax dependence on the mineral industry before this started transitioning was about 30 to 35%. Now it's down to 15% because of the kind of things that ENDOW is working on, the diversification of the economy. But as this guy pointed out from Texas, he says that the pain comes when you diversify the fiscal system to match the economic system. And it's, you know, where are we starting? We started at, well, for schools, the industry paid, the mineral industry paid 80% of all the school costs. That means that people who are using the schools paid for 26 or 20%. They're paying 20 cents on the dollar, and this can't go on unless we're going to have a sea change in the services we offer. And you know, that's the kind of thing that we get ourselves into when we have an imbalanced system, where, you know, you look at statistics where Wyoming has the highest, second or third highest amount of services dollar-wise per household delivered to them, but their tax burden is second or third to the lowest, which gets into, you know, my favorite saying in Wyoming is, if you don't pay, you don't pay attention.
Thanks, Mike. So Riatta, I wanted to let you sort of bring us home on this, because you know, ideally, Casper is the center of the state in a lot of ways. You're part of that economic development effort, and you're somebody I know that has a real love for the state and a desire to see the state succeed. So I wanted to just have you kind of take us home before we start having questions from the audience.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm going to respond to a few things from Mike there. In my conversations with companies in the wind industry, the problems with Wyoming is not necessarily the $1 per megawatt tax. The problem is that there's inconsistent messaging, and there's a real feel that Wyoming is not open for business for wind. And that's the biggest problem that I'm seeing with wind companies that I talk to, is they don't want to relocate, whether they're a manufacturer, or whether they're a developer, or whatever they're doing. They don't want to come to Wyoming to a place where the public is not welcoming. That's one of the first questions that I get asked. Oh, so Wyoming wants wind now? Because we haven't been hearing that. So that's one. And along with that, when there's threats to increase that wind tax, then why do they want to come do a bunch of building when they don't know if it's going to stay at the 1? The 1 is not really a problem, but if it suddenly goes up to 5, then that changes their business model, right? So then they have to go back and change all of their numbers and figuring out whether or not this is actually going to work. So one thing that my CEO likes to say is cheap's not always free. So even though Wyoming doesn't really have taxes, it's an easier story. It seems sexier to say, well, we'll offer you incentives to come build when, we'll get rid of some taxes for you. Well, Wyoming already doesn't have the taxes. And so me and my counterparts in other counties in economic development have to figure out a better way to tell that story and say, well, we already don't have the taxes. You're never going to have to face this. It's not a 3-year exclusion. It's a never. You never have this tax. But I think, going back, it's the inconsistencies. That's the problem. And if Wyoming is really open to wind development, but that's where I'm glad that we've heard this a lot today, that it's not a coal versus wind, and I think that's the message we have to share because they're two different markets. So one thing that economic development has not been successful in recruiting data centers, I'm not even trying. There's no point in me even targeting data centers because we don't have enough renewable power to even attract them. So we have to get our wind and renewables up before we can even face that battle. Data centers are not coming to Wyoming in the meantime, unless we can make that renewable energy source something that they can rely on. And then I just want to point out again that wind companies are willing to pay their fair share. That's not a problem. There's a lot of companies that I know that deal in the wind sector that they want to be able to pay back to their communities. So they just need to have a consistent base for their taxes and for what they're going to pay.
Well, thank you. So I think we're at a point where we can take questions from the audience if there are some. Anne.
So I the analysis of Representative Madden about the, once you get down to the operating level, the wind, the $1 can pay for, what'd you say, 4 out of the 100 students or something like that. But my concern is, what we've seen in Wyoming is, we're seeing this in Casper right now, there's in the newspaper, they're going to close 3 elementary schools and a junior high. We build up for the boom, and then we have the bust. We build up for the boom, and we have the bust. And I appreciate, but so my concern is more in the building part, because even though we talk about building, bringing in 700 jobs with 100 remaining afterward long term, and that's in, let's say, Medicine Bow. Well, the town of Medicine Bow has to accommodate those 700 workers' families, and then they're down to 100. And what happens to Medicine Bow? And then the same thing happens in Douglas, or the same thing happens in Rollins. And these are small towns that, frankly, 10 employees makes a big difference, much less 100. And so it's not that I'm anti-wind, I'm not, quite the opposite, but I'm trying to figure out how do we in Wyoming balance the build-up and the costs associated with build-up against the long-term. So the long-term issue is, of course, how do we pay our bills, and that's at a county level, a city level, and a state level.
Okay, thank you. Who wants to take that?
How can we deal with the booms and the busts? And what you're talking about here is rather than a boom and a bust. I guess a boom and a bust with employees, but we're talking about 2 phases of a wind farm project, and one is the construction and development phase, and the next one is the long run, and that's the one that hopefully we have to address. And it's a challenge for a small state. If you're talking about the same thing in Denver or anywhere, I guess in Colorado on the east face, you've got lots of infrastructure, lots of population, and lots of different places for people to go and people to live. My suspicion would be, and there's probably some experts in the industry who will tell you that for the construction phase, it's probably not a characteristic thing that people would bring their families here and start in schools, although maybe it is. I just don't think the impact is, if you have 700 employees versus 100 employees in the operation and maintenance, there's certainly more children per 10 employees associated with the long run operation and maintenance of the facility. And, you know, it's always been that way. I can remember years ago out in Big Piney, they had a boom when they were building I think it was a processing plant for natural gas or something. And they built a man camp, which is another story in itself. But what it did is it discouraged people from coming to settle in the area, because that little town in Big Piney didn't have any way to handle the gross larger number of employees that they had. And I don't know if anybody else has anything to say on this, but it's not quite like we had booms and busts with what Casper is facing right now. What we have now is a transition that's going to be painful and is going to be long term before it evens out.
So I can't exactly answer your question, because I think your question's a little bit more on the government side. But I am going to say for Casper and what we're looking at, we have to diversify, and that's ENDOW's purposes as well. But Casper, we're looking at 4 industries, kind of 5, but finance, medical, technology, energy, and manufacturing. So Casper's industry, its economy has been dependent on oil and gas for so many years. It's a volatile industry, and it probably will forever be that way. But wind is much more stable, right? Because they sell that contract for 20 years. So they know how much they're going to make for 20 years. It's not a month by month, how much am I going to sell this for industry. And so obviously wind is not the only industry we're looking at, right? We're just trying to see what other technology advancements we could get into, cloud computing, cybersecurity, some things like that. We have a great medical base. A good economy can survive that boom bust if they're not reliant on one industry. And so that's what we have to do from an economic development standpoint.
Ken? Yeah, thanks. I had a question for my Converse County neighbor, Rick Grant. And that is, we've had a lot of discussion about the predictability of permitting and trying to make that process more expeditious. And I'm curious as to whether at the county level, either alone or in conjunction with industrial siting, there's been any discussion about identifying appropriate areas for this in advance. And then using that as a foundation for expediting siting permitting and things of that sort.
Certainly. I think the ideal question there is, what do you plan to do with zoning in your county? Converse County is a county that does not have zoning. We don't regulate how you build your house, where you build your road, or what you put on that property. This has been an issue in Converse County for years. We are a strong private property rights type of community, and probably will continue down that path. However, locations are depicted by the resource. Those landowners that have that resource, who are willing to develop, go out and try and negotiate with a company, will probably end up with some type of development. That doesn't mean that every inch of every county is going to be covered. We have landowners who don't want them. You cannot be forced to take them. There's no eminent domain for the private industry to come in with a wind turbine and put it on your property. Location, again, is based on availability of the resource. In Converse County, we were approached about right place, wrong place. Until zoning happens, and we have a group of individuals serving as county commissioners that feel that zoning is an issue, probably not going to change anything that we do in Converse County. You can develop a form of zoning, but that's only as good as those sitting on that board at that time. It can be changed through the process at any given time. I can't foresee ever going there. I should say never, because I will be replaced at some point in time, as will the other 4 board members that serve with me on the commission. But it's our philosophy at this time, that's not an issue as we look at our permitting process. As long as it meets our permit, falls in line with industrial siting, does not create a health and safety issue within our communities, and meets the definition of what a wind production facility is going to produce and has an avenue to sell that product. It's not going to get built if there isn't that transmission corridor or the chance to sell to a PPA to another entity.
Are there other questions? Well, there's one thing that we've talked a lot about the policy issues here, but one of the things that I'm reflecting on, and it's something that the former president of the Senate, President Nicholas, and I talked about at one point. I was a little bit shocked one day when I talked about how young ranchers and farmers like myself, 60 years old, need to have opportunities. And we are an aging population. I think that's just obvious. One of the concerns is how, and Jeremiah, I guess I can turn this to you a little bit. I look at Colorado, and there's, Vestas moved there a few years ago. I know that GE was looking at trying to locate a manufacturing plant in Laramie County at one point. And Wyoming needs to attract young, ambitious folks so that they can pay my way as I get older and older. But have you looked at that? Because part of that is the ecology, right, to make sure that you can grow enterprise in the state.
Yeah, we've started to dig into that, and certainly the data is pretty darn clear. We are an aging population in our state, and we have a tremendous out-migration of our youth in particular. And when I give presentations about ENDOW, the first slide I start with shows this report from 1962. Shows the pros and the cons or I guess the good and the bad, the opportunities that exist in there. And that same thing shows up in 1962. And a big part of that, particularly as we did our survey, is a few things. Obviously, there has to be opportunity here in the places that we're educating our youth for. So we're going to have to work on that. But we also have to have the community amenities that this younger generation and future generations want to have. And part of it as well, and I think it goes to perhaps your point, is progressive policies in some of these areas and support for things like renewable energy and wind energy. And I didn't get the sense as I reviewed those surveys that it was to put the thumb on our traditional energy sources. It's that this needs to be a part of our mix and part of our future economic development plan. So I think we've got to give serious consideration to that as we continue to move forward and continue to do further evaluation on that.
So Jason, I was wondering, as L&H expands, I know you've expanded in Sheridan and Gillette, and people change their jobs. Having gone through one of these economic downturns back in the 80s, what we found is there was kind of a treasure trove of young talent that had been employed elsewhere. I'm a little bit troubled as we look at data now. They seem to indicate that we've had, although we have a very low unemployment rate, we have an out-migration as people are looking for other jobs. Are you finding a pretty good group of people to be able to recruit from and an opportunity to build a business?
Yeah, I think we are. Especially our field service people. It's a younger demographic of people, and they're not just from within the state, but people that we pull in from adjacent states as well. So really, the talent for us, finding, attracting that talent really hasn't been a problem. Keeping them busy has been the bigger challenge.
Can I just add to that? Sure. As we've gone through our evaluation, it obviously shows that there is this tremendous interest from those that grew up in Wyoming and have gone elsewhere to come back to Wyoming. And certainly some of them need the opportunity because, and what I mean by that is that they need the job opportunity to exist already to come back. They're looking for that. But we're also starting to look at how can we create, or bring those individuals that are willing to be more entrepreneurial and innovative and grow that opportunity for themselves and for others as part of this effort. And I do think that we can, even as we do our work and educate more, we're going to see some of those folks leave, no doubt. But we need to maintain the connections with those individuals that once that opportunity exists for them to create it or for them to step into a job, that they can come back to this state. That's going to be tough for some because you don't want to just spend money on somebody that's going to go elsewhere to start. But that's a risk we need to take.
Well, I think it's a good point. I mean, it's interesting to me that Wyoming, we always talk about how we're part of the Old West, and that's our legacy. But even more than that, it's the people who came here who saw opportunity and made it happen. Ann, I think back to your dad and the way they built Casper, and then it kind of went through a little bit of a decline, and now you've got people like Riatta coming back. And in Casper, you have a really exciting kind of resurgence of the downtown part. You're seeing that a little bit in Cheyenne now. And this is my way, sort of a Chamber of Commerce speech, I guess, but we can get a little bit down in the tooth thinking about the troubles for coal. We've seen a little bit of that, but we've come down off some highs into a kind of more level future on coal. To the Jonathan's point that he made earlier, all of our wind generation is going west. Most of our coal production is going east. So this is really I guess an opportunity that Wyoming, with a little bit of optimism, can really begin to start to become a vital and well, we are vital and exciting, but even more so. Riatta, do you want to talk just a little bit about some of the stuff that you're seeing going on downtown?
So if any of you have not been to Casper since the eclipse, you should come downtown. We have the world famous Wonder Bar has been completely renovated. It is really, really neat. Upstairs there is a wall of 40 beers on tap that you pour yourself. You pay by the ounce. You just have a little bracelet thing. We have a new venue called Gaslight Social, which is really big, has a lot of like arcade type games in the back. Rocca's Pizzeria has been there for a little while, so maybe some of you have had a chance to eat there. Maybe 2 years it's been there. The downtown square, David Street Station, is a beautiful venue. It's still, phase 2 is under construction still, and that will have a splash pad for summer, and it'll be an ice skating rink in the winter. The old Yellowstone district in Casper is developing as well. So yeah, it's a really fun atmosphere, very much attracting the millennials. The Art Walk, which is the first Thursday of every month, gets a lot of people downtown right after work for a couple hours, and they gravitate through shops downtown and other things. So going back to recruiting this younger age group, which is really that millennials, probably the 25 to 35 range. I'm not sure what the exact years are on that. It's part of it is keeping kids in Wyoming or bringing them back, like myself. I'm from Leiter, Wyoming. If you don't know where that is, it's part of the UCLA, U-Cross, Claremont, Leiter, Arvada. But it's also being able to, I think Jeremiah said, attract our age group back to Wyoming, to Wyoming, not back to Wyoming, to Wyoming. So they might be from other states, but they're smart entrepreneurs, and they have talents that they're bringing into the state and can build businesses and expand here. And so we have to seek those opportunities, and technology is really a space we have to look at. And with wind, there is a technology component. One of the presenters this morning was talking about storage and the lack of efficient technology on how to store wind energy or solar energy. So if we had somebody here, maybe through the University of Wyoming, maybe somewhere else in Wyoming, who figured out what that perfect battery is to really store that and make it efficient, we could ship it overseas or ship it to another state. But Wyoming could really be the battery of the U.S. right? We're an energy state, we've always been an energy state. Well, now we're going to be a diversified energy state. Look at it that way. And we're exporting more energy than we're using. So we got to look at those opportunities.
Well, thanks. Are there any other questions? Yes, there's one.
Hi there, I'm Diane, and my family came from Douglas, and they're now in Cheyenne. And I have been away from the state for about 35 years, came back just a year ago, and I'm about 20 years removed from being a millennial. But one of the questions that I had set up for the prior panel, or more like a comment, is yes, the jobs are important, but the quality of life is exactly what the millennials are looking at. And they're also looking at how is a company giving back to the community. They're very philanthropically focused. And I think it's important when we attract industry and businesses that we also be concerned about what their interests are in terms of nonprofits, in terms of NGOs. And I'm very gratified, I guess, I don't know if that's even the right way to express what I'm feeling, but to hear you all talking about that and having that also be a cornerstone. I was blown away by what's going on in Casper. In fact, I do live here in Laramie, and I was like, wow, maybe this really isn't quite the right town, although it is the right town. But you guys are doing great things up there, and what Kate is doing is remarkable. And just thank you, everybody, for what you're focusing on, and it's good to be home.
Well, thank you. Are there any other questions? There's one back there. My good friend, Professor Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. How much of this discussion is really about leadership at the state level primarily? If you were trying to assess the legislature, how would you evaluate its support of the wind industry? And the reason for that question is sort of from the wind industry's perspective, if you look at what's going on, how much of this discussion about increasing taxes, and particularly generation tax, is just noise? Noise around trying to create uncertainty, and uncertainty creates, as we saw this morning, companies saying, Wyoming's anti-wind, let's go build in Colorado or New Mexico. And so you just reflect this whole problem of, are we going to miss the opportunity because of that kind of uncertainty, or does it really reflect kind of strong opinions within the legislature? Second question, somewhat related, but a number of people in this room were deeply involved in crafting legislation in 2010 for the amendments to the Industrial Siting Act and the regulatory scheme for counties, in addition to the tax issues. We're now almost 8 years into it. We've got a panel tomorrow that's going to talk some about this, but I'd be interested in this group's views on, did those amendments in 2010 work? Do they need to be re-examined and potential changes made because they don't reflect the current reality of the permitting needs for the industry in 2018? Thank you.
Both good questions, Larry. Let me take a shot at the first one, and then I'll pass it off to answer whichever questions they want. I think the point you make about the uncertainty in the tax scheme is one that the state has really got to deal with down the road. And I'll look at it from a slightly different point of view than we normally do. We're a low-tax state. ALEC leads us number 4 for business-friendly climate. That's compared to Massachusetts, which is number 33. I think you can see the activity there. You can see the activity here. I wouldn't draw too many conclusions from that. But clearly, there's something to what tax stability is, and that goes to the point Riatta made about diversification. The viewpoint for me is the state's bond rating went from AAA, stable, to AAA minus, to AA stable, and we're AA. Like most commodity states, we're kind of in that same rank. To put our troubles in perspective, you know, what are we, Mike, about a $400 million gap, a little bit more than that, it could be a bit more than that. We had a $1.8 billion rainy day fund. You know, it's built back a little bit, but it's going to be hit over the next couple of years. You can do that math. Alaska has a much more difficult challenge than us. They had $18 billion stacked away as a rainy day fund, $2 billion less than we have in our total portfolio. $18 billion, they're down to $1 billion, and they have a $4 billion gap in their budget. So like a lot of commodity states, we have a very volatile income stream. We don't have ways to fix that. We, from an investment side, we keep looking for capital gains. Those are volatile as well. We're going to balance our budget on some great future market event or something from outer space landing and paying all our taxes. And I really worry about that. And I think that's a piece of why our bond rating has gone down. And if I were a business looking to locate in Wyoming, I would say, what is the fiscal stability of that state going to be long term? Not just this year, but the year after next, and the year after next, and the year after next. We heard about Texas that went from, what was it, 78% mineral related down to something less than 30%, I think, at this point. So clearly these are challenges that Wyoming's going to have to deal with. And it's not just today's low taxes, it's how do we make sure we keep a low tax structure going forward. As far as legislative leadership on that, my view, it takes courage to make those choices. It is, as Mike put it, you know, the pain came with that conversion on the fiscal side, not so much on the diversification of the economy. It was on how you deal with the fiscal aspects of that. Our state has not come to grips with that yet. It needs to. And we'll be part of that conversation as we go forward. But the other part of your question, I guess I'll pass off, and Mike, if you want to talk on that.
And I think I was supposed to comment on what the legislature is thinking. I guess I can tell you what I'm thinking. You know, when it comes to energy sources, I'm agnostic about it. I don't care what they are. Whether wind develops faster than coal is fine. If coal develops faster than wind is fine. It was just, to me, we should keep out of it from the standpoint of a tax. And my opinion now is that we're not out of it. We're not being neutral when it comes to these industries. You know, you look at the present day tax system in the mineral industry, they have to pay sales tax, they have to pay property tax, they have to learn tax with a fraction of 100%, so they pay on every penny of it. So, you know, it's not an easy thing to conclude, but I really feel that you have to treat everybody the same, and that if you treat everybody the same, then you've got a strong argument. Right now, I don't have a strong argument. If I see somebody that's more bent towards, got relatives in the wind or the oil and gas industry, you say, how come we're cutting a fat deal for wind? Because wind doesn't have to pay a severance tax, they don't have royalty taxes, and you know, certainly there's a legitimate reason for it. But that's just what I feel. I don't know what the rest of the legislature thinks. The last thing I'll say is that this whole thing on taxes is so overblown that I really get frustrated by it. Because, you know, if you look at this latest survey of manufacturers, where do you think on citing decisions taxes comes? You think it's first or second? No, it's fifth. And all we talk about in Wyoming, we got to keep taxes low. Well, let me give you another example. Of all the states, who has the lowest taxes of all 50? We're number 50 in industrial, commercial, residential, and agriculture, all at the same time. And if you look at all the states around us that don't have low taxes, they beat us in economic development year after year after year. We're last. We're last in economic development, in diversification, but we're lowest in taxes. You know, and this business about people thinking they have to have a, you know, a better idea of the future, and they say, well, you're trying to run us out, that you're not looking at the numbers. The $3 tax on wind is insignificant when you look at a $23 production tax credit.
Mr. Wolf, trying to help answer some of your questions. Industrial siting imposed those amendments and rules, I think, at a time when it was needed. We're facing those same requirements now as solar comes into our state. We have no rules and regulations that they are going to follow. Our counties don't have those. But when those rules and regulations were implemented in 2010, it would have made my job easier as a landowner as I developed my contract with that company. It gives us some direction. It tells us what we need to look at. And as a commissioner, I'm a part-time employee of Converse County. It takes the manpower and the expertise to delve into these things with some idea of what you're doing. I don't have that expertise on everything. You have to do wildlife studies, avian studies, socioeconomic studies, historical, you name it, it's in there. It takes a lot of time and commitment for these industries coming in to go through that. We review them as a commissioner, and if the industrial siting passes those, then we pass them as well. We can make some recommendations, but we don't hold the key on every one of those that goes through. I think it was good. It's a living document. If we see something that doesn't work, we need to amend it. We need to get with industry and make those changes that make it more pertinent to today's needs of what's actually taking place on the ground, so that we don't get down the road 40 or 50 years from now and go, gee, I wish we'd have thought about that. Everybody thought about it, we just didn't do anything about it. So I think it's important that we continue to look at industrial siting, but not do it in a bubble. Look at it as big picture with industry and those leaders that have to deal with it.
Well, we've come to the time, so first I want to thank the panel. Second, I want to thank you for all staying away. But thank you very much, panel. Would you join me in thanking you?